Your position has been to cast the Lib Dems against Mr. Johnson and Mr. Corbyn as moderate, as reasonable. Vote for you because of that, not for them. But this revoke Article 50, no second referendum, that made you, in the eyes of many, extreme and undemocratic.
Well, I mean, I would take issue with that description of our positioning. So, I mean, certainly when it comes to, our economic plans, we care whether they add up. Others, have kind of, thrown that out of the window.
I mean, on the Article 50 revoke.
But on the issue of our relationship with the European Union, you've got, Jeremy Corbyn, who's refusing to say where he stands, wants to negotiate a Labour Brexit. You've got Boris Johnson, who wants Brexit to happen. We are firmly on the other side of that divide, of, what our vision is for the future of our country and our relationship with the rest of the world. It's an open internationalist position.
Let me tell you why people regard it as undemocratic. 3 years ago, 52% of this country voted to leave the EU. But you were proposing to reverse that, heading a government which almost certainly would have been elected in a lot less than half the vote. It was undemocratic.
Well, Andrew, you're not going to find more strong supporters of changing our broken voting system than Liberal Democrats. I've campaigned to change our voting system for the last 20 years.
But you were going to reverse Brexit on what you call the broken voting system.
We work within the system that we have, and any government in our country works on the basis of trying to get a majority and then implement their manifesto. So yes, I'm going to keep campaigning to try to change the voting system. But in the context of the system that we have, I'm also going to stand up and give people a chance to stop Brexit.
Right. But your manifesto says that electing a Lib government is the only way to stop Brexit. But even you no longer believe that.
It's the only way to guarantee it in this election. So,
But it can be stopped in other ways now.
Well, it may be able to be, and we will try to do so. It's the only way to guarantee it in this election.
Well, let's look at how you might get that referendum if there's a hung parliament, because that's probably your best hope now. You've ruled out working with both Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn in a hung parliament. So what would the Lib Dems do if there was deadlock? You just sit in your hands?
Look, we work with other parties all the time.
But you said you won't work with them.
I've said Liberal Democrat votes aren't going to put Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn into number 10, but will I work with Labour MPs? In fact, have I been working with Labour MPs and Conservative MPs and SNP and Plaid Cymru and the Green MPs and Independent MPs to try to stop Brexit? Yes, if you look at what we've done in the last 2.5 years, we have worked together.
Would you work with Jeremy Corbyn?
Just to finish that point, have we stopped Brexit? Yes, we've stopped Brexit twice already, and if you have more Liberal Democrat MPs in the next Parliament, we can stop it for good.
Would you work with Jeremy Corbyn to stop Brexit?
Will I vote for a people's vote, which I hope he will, vote for? I mean, to be fair, let's face it, his record is not great. We've tabled amendments 17 times.
But you would help him to get a people's vote?
If Jeremy Corbyn had supported our most recent amendment on a people's vote, we might have been having a people's vote instead of a general election right now. But, will I vote for legislation for a people's vote? Yes, I will vote for legislation for a people's vote.
But in a hung parliament, a new government can't deliver another referendum for at least 6 months. It would need to pass a Queen's speech. It would need to pass a finance bill because we'd be into the new financial year. At the very least, you'd have to abstain, or you might have to vote for these things to get to that referendum under a Corbyn government. Are you prepared to do that?
Look, we don't know the result of the election
but you know
yet.
what I'm saying.
We don't. Look, to be honest, if Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn don't win a majority at this election, then there's no guarantee that they're still going to be the ones that are leading their parties a week afterwards, right?
Sure.
So Liberal Democrats will work to stop Brexit. We will support legislation that puts in place a people's vote, and we will work across party.
And you would keep a Corbyn government in for long enough to deliver that second referendum.
I've been really clear about this. Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson, neither of them are fit to be Prime Minister. I mean, we saw you very powerfully put Jeremy Corbyn on the spot about his actions on anti-Semitism. I hope you get the chance to put Boris Johnson on the spot, but sadly at the moment that's not looking particularly likely. But the truth is that neither of them are people who I think, many in this country actually would like to see in those rules. So will I work?
But that might be your only choice. The Corbyn government, minority government, needing your support to deliver a second referendum. That might be your only choice. What would you do?
I will vote for legislation to pass a people's vote. Of course I will. And I would have done that under the previous Conservative government, just as I would do it under any other government. But I will work with people on a cross-party basis. If we can elect enough MPs who support a people's vote, then we have the chance of delivering it. Liberal Democrat MPs are the strongest advocates of Remain.
So it's not beyond the pale, then, that you would work with a Corbyn government?
I'm not going to put Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, but if a government of any colour puts down a bill in Parliament to have a people's vote, then we will support having a people's vote to put a specific Brexit deal to the people with the option of remaining in the EU.
What if Mr Corbyn needed not just the support of the Lib Dems for this second referendum, but he needed the SNP too? And the SNP said, fine, but we want a second Scottish referendum. What would you do then?
Well, I'm not going to support another referendum on independence. We know last time we had the referendum on independence, the uncertainty that it caused for Scottish businesses and for the economy. And when you look at all of the mess of Brexit right now, the last thing we need in Scotland is more chaos on top of that existing chaos.
I understand that. So you would sacrifice a second Brexit referendum if it came with a price tag of a second Scottish referendum. Is that right?
No, the SNP say they want to stop Brexit. So the SNP, I put it to you, are not going to...
I'm not asking what the SNP would say.
What are they going to do? They're not going to support having a people's vote.
Would you pay the price of a second referendum in Scotland?
I'm not going to support a second referendum in Scotland with all the extra chaos that brings.
I understand. Even if that meant you didn't get a second Brexit referendum.
I will vote for a people's vote on the Brexit deal, and I think SNP members of Parliament will also vote for that legislation because they will know that that's what people in Scotland want.
Your manifesto is clear that you want 16-year-olds to have the vote and EU citizens to have the vote. Would they have the vote for a second Brexit referendum?
I would very much like them to have that, yes.
And even if it meant delaying the referendum a bit to get the legislation through to do that, you would go along with that?
Well, I think it's possible in discussions that I've had about how we could do this swiftly. So, for example, it would be possible to pass a law to extend the franchise to 16-year-olds. It's easier with EU citizens because they're already on the voters' roll. But with 16-year-olds, you could pass a law to extend the franchise, and that obviously what is required is that the electoral registration officers do the canvass.
You want it. If it can be done, you want it. But you see, a lot of Leave voters will say to you, you're fiddling the franchise now to get the result you want. You're not fighting it on the 2016 referendum basis. You're changing it to give your side a better chance.
I've always supported votes at 16. That's not a new position. And indeed, we have votes at 16, as you know, in Scotland, where for local elections, for Scottish Parliament elections, for the independence referendum. And you know what? The sky in Scotland is still there. I mean, it's sometimes admittedly a bit grey and rainy, but it's still there. I'm not arguing the case for or against
16-year-olds. That's your position. I'm just saying that Leave voters would see it as a fiddle. And look at what Mr Corbyn's trying to renegotiate. Remain in the customs union, remain in the single market, stay fully aligned with all EU rules, probably free movement continuing as well. Leave voters will say, hold on, that's not Leave, that's a version of Remain, and you fiddled the franchise, we're just not going to have anything to do with this referendum. What would you do?
Well, look, I want 16-year-olds to have the vote, and let's be clear, I've always wanted that. That's a consistent position. And
but what would you do in these circumstances?
That generation are going to be the most affected by the decision on leaving the European Union or not.
I'm not arguing with you about 16-year-olds. I'm talking about what may happen if you go down this road. Because it could be that a vote for the Lib Dems in these circumstances would be a vote for chaos.
And I disagree.
But if the Leave side decides it's just going to boycott the referendum?
I think that in having a people's vote, the most sensible position to put to the public would be to put Boris Johnson's Brexit deal to the public against the idea of remaining. Boris Johnson's deal has got advocates who are
Brexit. But that's not what Mr Corbyn's proposing.
No, none of us really know what Mr Corbyn's proposing because he's offering everyone a free pony, frankly.
Supposing the worst happens from your point of view and Brexit does take place, would you immediately start to campaign to rejoin the EU? I mean, I know you're always going to be in favour of it, but would you immediately start a campaign to rejoin?
Look, I think our best future is within the European Union. I have not given up hope that we can stop Brexit.
But if we leave, would you campaign to rejoin?
We've not left, Andrew. We were supposed to leave twice this year, and we haven't. And I'm working to stop Brexit. And
no, I got that.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
Well, you're not going to answer. That's fine. Your manifesto says that you want to be at the heart of the European Union.
Yeah.
But the heart of the European Union is economic and monetary union. So would you be prepared to join the euro?
I don't think we should be joining the euro. I think being at the heart of the European Union, I do not interpret in the way that you have just described it there. I think that's about us playing a leadership role within the EU. We've done that on so many occasions. If you look at the climate talks, the Paris Accord, the UK played a leadership role getting the EU to adopt an ambitious position, and then the EU managed to get the world to adopt an ambitious position on the climate emergency. That's the kind of thing about us being at the heart of the EU.
You can't be at the heart of the EU if you're not a monetary union.
That's
where all the talks about future integration are taking place. That's the whole dynamic between Paris and Berlin. You can be in the EU, but you cannot be at the heart of it.
I disagree. I think, and this is, in a sense, one of those myths. Actually, the UK has played and is a key leading role in the EU without being in the euro, with all of the bespoke deal that we have, with the rebate, with the various opt-outs. Actually, we have a brilliant deal as members of the European Union.
Right.
And I think we are at the heart of the EU, and we should stay there rather than giving up that international influence and heading off to stand alone and, isolated.
You obviously want to stay, and you think if we do, there'll be what you call a remain bonus. More money to spend on public services, based on economic forecasts, which would assume a bit of a higher growth than if we were to leave.
Yeah.
Now, 3 years ago, we had several economic forecasts about what would happen if we voted to leave. Which ones were correct?
Look, there's lots of forecasts that are there. You're going to have some in front of you that you're going to tell me some various figures. But what I would say is that we're not basing this on solely one piece of information. If you look at the broad range of economic analysis, including the government's own analysis. Sometimes the specific figures vary, as you would imagine, from different economists, but the direction of travel is clear. Staying in the EU will be better for our economy. There will be more money to spend on public services.
You need the faster growth to get that extra money to spend. If it doesn't materialise, if the forecasts are wrong, and a lot of them have been, you don't have that money.
Well, let's be fair, we have also been cautious. So the IFS forecast suggested that growth would be 2.1%, whereas we've gone for a figure of 1.8%.
Right.
And we're also being, if you like, generous to the leave side, because we're assuming that it would be 1.4% in those plans, though actually there's plenty of circumstances where it would be much less than that.
You don't generate the extra revenues, agree?
Look, every single government...
Your figures depend on forecasts.
Every government's figures depend on forecasts, as you well know.
The remain bonus, 50 billion.
Yes.
Is what your forecasts produce.
Which the independent IFS say is, makes sense.
But I'm looking at the cost and spending
reasonable.
plans that your party has published for the middle of the next decade. How much is the remain bonus in these figures?
Well, it's 50 billion over the course of the Parliament. In the final year, it's 14 billion pounds.
Right. So 5 years in, it's an extra 14 billion a year.
Yeah.
It's not 50 billion a year.
We've been very clear that it's 50 billion across Parliament.
So it's misleading because you've often implied that there'll be 50 billion more to spend, but in the middle of the next decade. The real figure is 14 billion.
We are setting out our plans for the next 5 years, and in the course of that 5 years, there will be £50 billion extra. Right. It could be more than that, absolutely, and we've taken a cautious estimate.
But the impact is an extra 14 billion by the middle of the decade. That's it.
In the fifth year, and of course,
if you get the growth,
and of course, which, as I say, every forecast is based. Every spending plan is based on a degree of forecasting.
But yours is based that we stay in the EU. What's our growth rate at the moment?
Well, the 1.8 is actually pretty much.
No, at the moment.
Well, so it's pretty much what it has been for the last few years.
It's just over 1%. What's the Eurozone's growth rate?
I don't have the figure to hand.
It's just over 1%. And last time I looked, the Eurozone hadn't left the EU.
Sure.
So it doesn't follow if we stay in the EU, the growth rate will be higher.
Well, it does follow that if we leave the EU, the growth rate will be lower because our economy is not the same as the EU's economies. We will be turning our back on our closest trading partners. We'll be putting up barriers. We'll be creating much more uncertainty for business. We'll be making it harder for companies to export. We're going to be spending years in trade deal negotiations. Yeah, I mean,
I know you're assuming the faster growth if we remain.